Alright, the final of my favorite Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck rankings, this time on the hybrid decks or multiple summoning method decks. The ones that actually have a focus on multiple summonings and not just mainly one while still having some other summoning methods but doesn't exactly focus on it. Like Rockets or Bullets, because they focus on Link monsters but they have other summoning method monsters just for some support. While decks like Blue Eyes and Firewall, where they used to focus on one in particular method, now has multiple summoning methods because, like Blue Eyes, added Synchros, so now Synchros is actually really heavily focused with the deck, and Firewall or Cyber's Dragons just use every summoning method for the one big Link monster, so they count as multiple summoning methods. Similar to decks like Burning Abyss, where originally it was mainly Exceed until they put every other summoning methods with it. But anyway, let's just begin with my rankings, and remember this is all based on my opinion on their playstyle and design. So number 5 on my list is at Ignister. Design-wise, the main deck monsters are not as cool, but I really like the Ignis-like design, especially the Corki-like design, hence the character with the deck. The spells or traps are the character's pun names with I, which is something I also really like. Of course, focuses on Ignister Island to basically focus on spamming your monsters and then basically do your extra deck plays or even your ritual play. Another thing I really like is that each of the monsters actually represent one of the fallen Ignises here, especially the boss monster, where it's a mix and match of different summoning methods along with representing one of the fallen Ignises along with himself. And when we combine all of them, we make a Link 6. The first Link 6 in the game, the Arrival Cybers, and I just find it awesome as well. Overall, one of my favorite fun archetypes to play, especially on the multiple summoning methods that you can focus on, and each of them doing certain different things. I'm just hoping that there's still going to be a Link 4 boss monsters like every other Link deck there is, instead of just having a Link 3 and then going to Link 6. And then number 4, Blue Eyes. Blue Eyes was originally a fusion deck and a ritual deck in a way, but then added Synchros and could also play an Exceed engine if one day they will make Exceed monsters for it. That is not Legendary Dragon of White, by the way. It is one of those decks that have pretty much every single summoning method available to it actually. Even now has a new Link monster. Fusion monster wise, it has basically the ultimate dragons and whatever other dragons to fuse with Blue Eyes, and each one of them can be considered very awesome, especially the triple head devastating attacks. Even a new ultimate synchro as well, which was not very expected, originally just introduced as one support synchro and then actually adding more synchros to it, but now it's just an awesome dragon that just basically likes to nuke stuff, with having ultimate forms that have 3 heads and even evolved forms that are ritual monsters that go even crazier. Just watch as they make an ultimate ritual monster. I'm not going to be surprised if they actually do that. And maybe an Exceed monster one day, which is actually very possible if they decided to just go 3 level 8 dragons to make one big Exceed monster with 3 heads like the Galaxy Eyes. But on that, there's really not much to say but destruction and basically easy summons and cool monsters. That also includes cards that were originally not part of the archetype but now part of the archetype. And then number 3, it's Cyber's Dragons, or Firewall. Originally this was meant to be just a Link deck combined with Code Talkers, especially with Firewall Dragon being the main boss, but then they expanded it to the Cyber's Dragon, where basically we got a bunch of Cyber's Ace monsters that are either level 7 or rank 4 with 2500 attack with 2000 defense, just like every other reference of protagonist boss monsters. And I really like each of them on their own as it is, since they look pretty cool, and also effect wise they are also pretty strong, except for arguably Firewall Exceed Dragon, even though it's not completely too bad. But the cool part is the build up, where when we actually use all of them with Firewall Dragon, we make the Link 5 Firewall Dragon Dark Fluid, which Dark Fluid itself became from light to dark, which is actually very awesome in itself, and using each of your summoning methods to power it up. And then we get an ultimate Firewall Dragon, which is the Singularity, which is also, you could say, combining with the Ignis as well. Just overall cool designs, especially for all of its other forms with the dragons and the one magician, and in a way, very devastating as well. And then number 2, it's Odd Eyes. Base form Odd Eyes design is like okay to me, it's just a ground dragon to me. But what I really like about Odd Eyes is that it plays with the other dimension dragons along with the magicians, in which even that section has its own synchro boss monster with a evolved form that is also pendulum with it, which is also very awesome. Hence why I also like this archetype, because it has its pendulum whatever summoning mechanic. But the cool part is that it also combines with other dimension dragons, Like, for example, the main one with Dark Rebellion, it could even go to Raging and Rebellion Dragon, Raging being more Odd Eyes, and the Rebellion Dragon looking more Rebellion, and then combining with Clear Wing to make the Odd Eyes Wing Dragon, and then there's also the Venom Dragon as well, which are all in their respective summoning mechanics along being Pendulum, which I find it kind of unique in a way, even though at the same time they all have too many effects in my opinion, but overall they are just cool in design, and playstyle wise I really like that it utilizes every other summoning mechanic and then combining even further by combining it with Odd Eyes. And Odd Eyes itself has its own ultimate form when you combine other Dimension Dragons together, like the Odd Eyes Phantom Dragon if you're going with the Phantom Dragon route. We even got Revolution Dragon, which is a combination of the other dragons with Odd Eyes. And in a way, you can consider the Purified Zark being the Celestial Dragon Arc-Ray Dragon, even though that could be considered a completely different deck and basically consider a different deck overall. And speaking of basically combining all the other Dimension Dragons, you could technically play Zark in this, which is technically awesome itself. Oh yeah, and did I forget that Odd Eyes now has a ritual monster that is also Pendulum, and also has its own evolved forms that are basically using itself, and even its former self not even becoming Pendulum. Yeah, Odd Eyes has like so much variety of summonings. Just overall a cool design and basically all the Dimension Dragons, which is something I like. And now to honorable mentions. Speaking of the Dimension Dragons, let's go to Supreme Kings. In technicality wise, this is a completely separate deck with both a light and dark version. Uses all the Dimension Dragons with the focusing on summoning Zark himself by using the Dimension Dragons. And Zark itself is pretty awesome. And then when we bring out the light version, where we would use Zark just to bring out the light forms, it just looked gorgeous. But we also got the corrupted versions of the Dimension Dragons where we turn them into Supreme King versions. But other than the cool design, the playstyle wise is not as great as the Odd Eyes playstyle where you can combine it with the Magicians. Funny enough, this could combine with the Magicians as well. But in technicality wise, they're separate decks, and this one doesn't play as much versatility compared to Odd Eyes, where Odd Eyes you can still combine with its own dragons and even play Zark itself, while this one you can't really. Next would be Burning Abyss, which focuses on sending cards to the graveyard to activate effects, even randomly milling them to activate effects, which I find pretty cool. Originally focused on Exceed summoning, especially evolving its Exceed form, but now with every other summoning method with it, it's kind of considered every other summoning method, and I really like how when they go to the graveyard, it just effects activate, and a lot of stuff kind of just happen. And also, design-wise, I like what their designs are based off, which is another reason why I kind of like the deck. And finally to the last one, Six Sams. Originally doesn't even focus on any summoning methods, eventually focuses on using just synchros, and then they randomly added more summoning methods on top of it, because it can special summon a lot of monsters. Design wise, I really like how they're attributed samurais, while their main boss monster is a shogun that eventually became just legendary Six Samurai boss monsters. And over time, we just have a bunch of special summon monsters that can even use random extra deck mechanics, and they just added randomly more. And now we even have a new evolved Shien. Just overall very awesome, especially the part where they sacrifice each other to protect each other. But not as cool as the anime archetypes in my opinion. And finally to number 1, it's the original archetype that really focuses on the summoning methods, aka DDDs. This one archetype really focuses on the summoning methods, especially when it was first introduced. It's the very first one that actually had this focus. First off, I really like how most of the monsters are basically historic figures or events. Especially the Pendulum boss monsters, where they're basically focused on really big ass events like Armageddon. And that itself, I already find it awesome on top of using every other method. And we even have a new Link monster with Gilgamesh. Hopefully they make a new Gilgamesh as a High King, because the main 3, the greatest conquerors, also got evolved forms, being the High King versions. Armageddon's itself got evolved forms. Unfortunately, we don't have basically Pendulum Armageddon, where basically it's an evolved form from the main deck. It has to be just from extra deck, but oh well. I also like the Dark Contracts, where it's basically a reference of the treaties. Just overall a cool little concept where they just turn basically historic figures into basically demon-like, or even historic events turned into one big monster, which is something I also really like. Playstyle wise, it just basically focuses on having each summoning method on the field, and with the great power of effects, you must pay costs, and it's something I also really like as well. Just overall a very cool archetype, and hopefully they actually make more support soon. especially the DDDD section, because I think those could be considered the ultimate boss monsters for the deck. So that's it for my top 5 hybrid Yu-Gi-Oh deck rankings, or the ones with every summoning mechanic or multiple summoning mechanics. What do you guys think of it? How would you rank them, and what other decks would you put on the list, and what other changes would you make? Personally, these are my favorite hybrid decks, especially for those that were originally not hybrid decks but got turned into hybrid decks. I just find these really awesome. But overall, there isn't exactly too many variety of every summoning method decks, considering that many of them either focus on mostly one, sometimes two. So it is kind of hard to make this list as it is, especially on having a deck that actually has every other summoning methods. Obviously, most decks don't really have every summoning methods. Some very few decks introduced from Arc 5 and onward might have it, especially those that do have every summoning methods but don't focus on it. But many decks overall will have one main summoning mechanic with one secondary summoning mechanic. So yeah, the list kind of ended up being a little hard to make, but I didn't manage to find a good number of them, so I made this list as it is. But other than that's it for my thoughts on my favorite Yu-Gi-Oh decks with hybrid summoning mechanics, and see you all next time.